Welcome to Indus Special. I'm Meshal Malik. According to a report released by the World Bank, China's massive trillion-dollar Belt Road Initiative has the potential to speed up economic development and to pull out millions of people from poverty. Now, with the backdrop of this report, on tonight's show, we will discuss the BRE's flagship project, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. This $62 billion project stretches from Gwadar, a port city in the southwestern province of Pakistan, moving through Gilgit-Baltistan and connecting to the Kashgar city in Xinjiang province of China. CPEC aims to optimize trade potential and enhance energy security between China and Pakistan. But the project is also expected to bring about waves of development in the wider region. Let's find out more about the project, the latest updates, and what to expect in the near future. We welcome to the panel for our show today. Joining us is Mr. Lijian Zhao, who's the Deputy Chief of Mission of Chinese Embassy. He's joining us from Islamabad. We're also joined by Mr. Mustafa Hyder, who's the Executive Director of Pakistan-China Institute, joining us in the Islamabad studios. We're also joined by Mr. Andrew KP Leung, who is an international and independent Chinese strategist based in Hong Kong. Thank you all for joining us. Mr. Lijian, let me begin with you. Now tell us, what is the vision of this trillion-dollar project, the BRI?
Proposed by President Xi Jinping 6 years ago in 2013. He proposed this as an economic project, basically, to connect, China with the Asian, European countries, to have more connectivity, to have more economic cooperation with each other. So this is a grand project. It covers more than 60 countries, and it is widely welcomed by the participating countries. China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is one major and pilot project under the BRI, and Pakistan is, doing very good. CPEC is setting up a good example for other countries to follow.
Right. And sir, you've mentioned here that it was announced 6 years ago. Tell us a little about, since then, the progress, especially when it comes to CPEC.
Yeah, I think, I can give you a few numbers. For CPEC, we have already in the last 6 years, we have already, invested 19 billion US dollars. We have already 11 projects completed.
Right.
And there are 11 projects under construction. So now, we can see that in the last 6 years, CPEC was focused mainly on two areas. One is, to solve this problem of load shedding. So, among those 22 projects, many of them are power plants. So, the CPEC has played a very positive role in, reducing and solving this problem of energy crisis faced by Pakistan. Number two is, to solve this bottleneck of lack of infrastructure in Pakistan. So under the CPEC, there are, a few motorways, highways. So it is designed, to improve the infrastructure in Pakistan. So in the last 6 years, we have already, completed these two tasks. And in the next 5 years, we see, CPEC is entering the second stage.
Right.
In this second stage, mainly there are three priorities. One is this industrial cooperation. So we are trying to set up 9 special economic zones so that, the faculties can be established in those SEZs. Number two is this social sector development. So China is, committing to providing Pakistan with $1 billion US dollars so that, some social sector people's well-being projects could be implemented.
Right, and Mr. Lijian, in this focus of trying to create more social sector cooperation between the two countries, why is that an important part of the dynamic of CPEC?
Yeah, I think, finally, for this economic cooperation, we have to benefit the people. The benefits of CPEC will have to trickle down to the people. So that's why we have identified 27, projects of well-being. Mostly it will be in Balochistan, in southern KPK, in those far-flung areas of Pakistan. And this is the second area. The third area, we will encourage this third-party participation in CPEC. And, this CPEC and BRI, they are, inclusive and open initiatives.
Right.
So we are open to third-party participation.
Right. And Mr. Lijian, you have highlighted in detail all the benefits, economic and social benefits that Pakistan will get from this project. But I would like your input on how China will be benefiting from this as well. It being the largest importer of crude oil, tell us how CPEC will help its aid in flourishing and greater development within its territory.
Yeah, I think, for economic cooperation, we always see that this is a win-win cooperation. If it is, only benefits one party, it is not sustainable. So I think, China is also benefiting from, the economic cooperation with the Belt and Road countries. This is, especially true, for those, for example, those Chinese companies. Nowadays, according to the experts, 85 million jobs are moving out of China. They can, move to, mostly to this Belt and Road countries. And of course, this will, be good for Chinese industries too.
Right. And over here, when we're talking about CPEC and the BRI in general, the World Bank report that I also quoted earlier also mentioned that there needs to be greater transparency. And the Chinese spokesperson came out and said that they will make an earnest effort to read the recommendations in the report. What do you think will follow from that?
Yes, I think transparency is also one of the principles when we are working on, economic cooperation under the umbrella of BRI and CPEC. And we, of course, we need to receive supervision of the public, of the media, of the governments. We have to do that. And all these projects, they follow the procedures. Some of them, they are, some of them, they go for international bidding. Some of them, they are negotiated, between the governments, especially, those loan projects. Those, all of these projects will go through those procedures. And, this is, open for supervision of the society and the media.
Right. And Mr. Lijian, just the last question to you. Also, according to the World Bank report, it found that 60% of the employment is going to Chinese firms. Now, they said that the data was limited and they could not really confirm these figures. But in your opinion, when we're talking about employment being generated in countries that are cooperating with the BRI projects and also in CPEC, how do you see this playing out? Do you think there's greater employment for the Chinese firms or in both countries?
I think, I don't know where you quote this number, but according to my information, under CPEC,
this was quoted in the World Bank report.
I see. Under CPEC, it has created more than 75,000 jobs for the local people. But look at the Chinese. We have only about 10,000 Chinese working here. So the percentage is about 8-1. So the Chinese people are here. Mostly they are skilled workers. Mostly they are engineers. So they are helping Pakistan to train more skilled labor, skilled workers. If you are a boss of a company, you will also prefer to use the local people, because the Chinese workers, engineers, you need to offer them a larger salary. You need to buy air tickets for them. They have a lot of there are a lot of advantages of using the local workers.
Right. And on that note, thank you so much, Mr. Lijian Zhao, for joining us and taking out the time to talk to us. Mr. Leung, talking to you now, and going back to the point of how China is also benefiting from this project, I'd like to talk about the Malacca Strait dilemma that China has to face, and how CPEC would help it circumvent this.
Well, I'd like to bring in the geopolitical aspect of this project, because for China, the Belt and Road is not only double down on China's strength, which is global connectivity in terms of trade, in terms of the flow of goods and so on, but it's also to address the issue of national security. If we look at the China depends on trade, international trade, and the import of energies, and all this flow of trade and energies are flowing through various choke points. One of the chief choke points is the Malacca Strait. You see, the Malacca Strait is very, very narrow. It's controlled by the US 7th Fleet. And then, of course, the Port of Guarda, plays a very important part to address this kind of choke point, because the goods, the energy can pass through the Port of Guarda directly through the western part of China without going through the Malacca Strait. And you can see that the Belt and Road, there are two parts. One is the Maritime Silk Road. Of course, all the ports and so on is part of that. But also there is the belt, economic belt, of which the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is a belt, one of the many economic belts. And these economic belts also serve the purpose of addressing China's security, energy security. Now, there's another point I'd like to bring in, following up on the points covered, which is the jobs, the creation of jobs. Now, the jobs are created not only directly by these infrastructural developments, but once the infrastructure is in place, for example, you're building an entirely new port, there are all sorts of businesses, all sorts of new businesses are being created.
And Mr. Andrew, just quickly going back to the Malacca Strip, and I just want some greater emphasis on why China is vulnerable if it relies on this. I mean, 82% of its total crude oil imports go through this strip. Why is that position making it vulnerable? Just quickly brief us on that.
Okay. Well, of course, this is the 7th Fleet, because we are seeing a 360 degrees of rivalry between the U.S. As the existing superpower and its perceived challenger, which is China. And then you can see that the rivalry is playing out on many fronts, on trade, on technology, and then on the South China Sea, and then, of course, even on human rights. It's a 360 degrees. And of course, trade and energy security is a very important part of that, because, as I said, a lot of the flows passing through the Malacca Strait and that part, and then water, of course, is diverting when push comes to shove, the energy and various things can pass through the Port of Guarda.
Right.
to
And
China.
Mr. Andrew, hold on to that thought. We're going to go back to this and the strategic importance of Pakistan and the key role it's playing. Ms. Zoon Ahmed Khan, a journalist joining us from Beijing. Ms. Zoon, so tell us, when we're talking about CPEC and the waves that it's going to create in the region when it comes to development and economic cooperation and integration, tell us the impact of that and the extent of the impact.
So I think the first thing we need to understand is that what is the Belt and Road Initiative, and I think one of the important things to realize is that China has proposed a development strategy or policy which integrates the various needs of the global South and also some needs of developed countries. Infrastructure is big on the agenda, and multilateral cooperation is big on the agenda. Pakistan, out of this $1 trillion project or a proposition, I would say, is considered the flagship project, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And the interesting thing about the CPEC is that it was not just a proposition by China based on their vision for the BRI, but it was actually a combination of Pakistan's domestic needs at that time. We were in dire need of infrastructure. We were in dire need of energy. We wanted to develop the port of Gwadar. And more importantly, these needs were also China's advantages or strengths. China is in a position right now because of domestic overcapacity and an overall need to induce stability in the region, in the Eurasian region.
Right.
So it was a perfect match. Now, talking about the geoeconomic and geostrategic indicators or incentives, well, for China, there are three basic factors that were of consideration. Number one, this is compatible with China's policy to go west, to develop China's own western regions, which are at a lower level of development than the eastern region. So Pakistan, through the Karakoram Highway, allows for an outlet to China's western region towards the Arabian Sea and to the western markets, Central Asian markets. Secondly, stability. So, of course, we all know the situation in Afghanistan. It hasn't gotten any better in the past 20 years. And Central Asian and Pakistan and Iran, these are all impacted, but so is China. So if China's idea is that if there is economic prosperity, if people have livelihood and if people have something to look forward to that is conducive, then of course you can expect stability and less of an incentive for people to go towards something destructive.
Right.
And then...
And Ms. Zoon, just a last question to you. I do want to know how the people back in China, how they are taking this project, how they see people-to-people contact with Pakistan as an important element.
You know, this is such an important question. So for China, I've been here for 4 years, and I've seen how from one vision, in 2013, it was just a concept. And then in 2015, boom, it had a picture. It had an estimate, Pakistan, 46 billion, various countries, multiple billions. And for China, this is their contribution to the world, for the Chinese people. I think it's important to also understand that China is still a developing country to a large extent, but they have been so successful in alleviating poverty, over 600 million people out of poverty. And at this point, they feel that they can not only relate to the developing countries, but they can also contribute to them.
Right.
So for the Chinese people, this is very important. And for China, you know, unlike the Western model, for China, development or security and economic and cultural, everything is interconnected. So if we want a more secure world, then we have to think about a cooperation that is mutually beneficial, which is sustainable.
Right.
So the regional cooperation.
Right, and definitely, Ms. Zoon, from everything that you've told us, that for China, a number of factors that make this project a flagship project in the entire Belt Road Initiative. Thank you for joining us and taking out the time to talk to us. Now, going to the Islamabad studios, we're also joined by Mr. Hassan Daud, who's the CPEC Project Director. With him is Mustafa Hyder, who's the Executive Director of Pakistan-China Institute. Mr. Butt, let me begin with you. Now, we are talking about CPEC entering its second phase. Tell us a little more about that. What are the measures being taken on Pakistan's end to prepare for that second phase and make sure that it goes on in an orderly manner?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Actually, in last 5 years, most of the interactions or the projects that were undertaken in the CPEC framework were government to government understanding, MOUs, framework. And now from that, we are now entering into a phase where it would be more B2B engagements. And the government is cognizant of the fact that we need to, promote this business to business interaction between leaders of the business community from both sides. With this happening, what we've done is that we've taken certain steps because in our preparation for the next phase of CPEC, we did some exercise involve some business chambers and leading think tanks working on the business wise aspiration and inspiration for CPEC. So what we did was that first of all we established a CPEC business forum in which we there are about 15 leading business leaders of and from each pillar industry, like textile and steel and some of the others that and of course from there we have now during the visit of the Prime Minister to China, the recent visit for the Belt and Road Forum, we were able to also have a sizable number of business leaders from China getting together with, and most of the MOUs, if you look at the agreements and MOUs were signed during the recent visit, were on the B2B platform. And we are now also proposing to China, we've actually proposed to China to establish a Pakistan-China business forum. So we are trying to attract, encourage our business community to take lead in these interactions, and and the work that the government is supposed to do is formulating a policy framework. I'll just take a second more, is that, say for instance, we are now working on the Gawada City Master Plan, and in which we know that we have to bring in new policy and regulatory frameworks for attracting investment. So there again, we are asking our business community to give us recommendations for what sort of policies that we should implement.
Right, and Mr. Bhatt, that's a very important angle to all of this, and we're going to talk about it in greater. Before that, I'd like to ask Mr. Mustafa, Hyder, while we're talking about CPEC, one of the questions that always arises, especially for Pakistanis, is what is the cultural impact of such a mega project? How is that impacting the fundamental roots of what it means to be a Pakistani, and what are the positive changes that we are seeing in our society?
Yes, I think people-to-people connectivity and culture is a huge aspect of the Belt and Road Initiative. And earlier you were asking about the Belt and Road Forum, and I think it's very important to note that Belt and Road Initiative has shifted and evolved over time, over the past couple of years. I was honored to be part of both the Belt and Road Forums. The first one, which was attended by the former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, and this recent one, which was attended by Prime Minister Imran Khan. And in the first one, the focus was on brick and mortar, on big ticket items like energy power projects, highways, ports, and pipelines. And this time, and Hassan Saab was with me in Beijing as well this time it was very obvious that there was more focus on welfare projects. And this is not only limited to Pakistan, but overall, the approach was more of a softer side to things.
And Mr. Hyder, what do you think caused for this shift, this major change?
And youth exchanges and capacity building. So I'm just coming to what you've asked pertaining to Pakistan. I think that the cultural aspect is very important. Culture goes hand in hand with youth. Also, it goes hand in hand with opportunities for the youth of Pakistan in culture and education in China. So I think that there's a lot of overlapping, there's a lot of similarities between China and Pakistan. We have the same cultural values in terms of China has Confucius values, which is Confucianism. And Pakistan has South Asian values, which also includes respecting the elders, taking care of the young, giving back to society, which naturally synergizes with that of China. But I think that one thing I would like to reject is their statements and there's propaganda in some sections of the Western press of cultural hegemony, that China is taking over. What will happen to the identity of the countries where the Belt and Road projects are? But let us remind ourselves when the United States had a footprint in Hong Kong, or Britain had a footprint in Hong Kong and India and in Pakistan. At that time, it was one country. Or when the United States was in the Philippines and other countries, they were actual colonies. Did we? And then after that, when we took forth to Hollywood and other cultural phenomena, did we ever ask ourselves what is going to happen to our identity? So why, when it comes to China, do these news items, do these questions start arising? So I think this is very important, because we need to pause and we need to reflect and see, is this a genuine question, or is this question part of a larger agenda aimed to undermine CPEC? And I would like to link that with economic projects as well. When we talk about investment from China, questions start coming up. Will we become a colony of China? What will happen to Pakistan's economic sovereignty when it's investment? But when we took loans from Bretton Woods institutions, when we took loans from other countries in the West, we all know who they are. We never asked.
Right.
No one ever said. I never read anything.
And Mr. Mustafa, on that very important point of the nature of investment that's coming in and cultural hegemony, we're going to take a short break. But when we return, we're going to talk about this in greater depth. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Indus Special. Now, Mr. Andrew, before going to break, we were talking about this propaganda, as Mr. Mustafa Hyder referred to it, in the Western affairs about China gaining cultural hegemony in whichever country it goes to try to establish these projects. Now, I'd like your take on that, and especially when it comes to the U.S. and referring to the BRI as a Trojan horse of China.
Well, in the last speech given by Mike Pence, the Vice President of the United States, and also Pompeo, the Secretary of State. Now, they were referring to the Belt and Road is the road to nowhere, and then the belt is constricting the belt, trapping countries in debt. So they are obviously the United States is staying way away from the Belt and Road, and it is perceived as a projection of China's power and trying to eclipse the influence of the United States. And you can see that other countries, Western allies, are egged on by the United States to come up with rival projects, but nothing that compare in depth as well as the kind of complexity, people-to-people kind of connections offered by the Belt and Road. But nevertheless, countries like Australia and Japan, for example, also come up with their own version of the Belt and Road. But as I said, there is nothing compared to China's Belt and Road in terms of scope, in terms of scale, in terms of connectivity, in terms of people-to-people, the 360 degrees coverage of everything.
Right.
So I think that this obviously United States is viewing Belt and Road still with a great deal of suspicion.
Right. And Mr. Andrew, while we're talking about how Western affairs are claiming that this might be a debt trap for more developing nations and they might not know it yet, let's talk about the nature of investment that's coming in from China, the money inflow. What is that? Is it loans? Is it investment? How much interest is due on those payments? Give us a sense of that.
Well, I think that is that the funds are coming usually from different sources. First of all, of course, is the China's development banks, and of course there is a Silk Road Fund which funds these projects, and some projects are connected with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and some can be connected with the BRICS Bank or the New Development Bank. With China, Brazil, Russia, and so on and so forth, this new bank. So there are various sources, but as pointed out by my co-panelists earlier on, it's important for CPEC as a flagship initiative for Pakistan to be seen to be more open to other sources, and particularly from the private sector. And that is one of the criticism of the West, saying that the Belt and Road is only China, the Chinese state, and not only is it not transparent, it's not opening up opportunities for private investors. And also, if you look at the advantages of these initiatives, it's not just economic and culture, but it's also bringing the various people together.
Right. And Mr. Andrew, hold on to that thought. I do want to get Mr. Hassan Butt's take on this as one. We're talking about the nature. We hear that Gwadar is operating on a grants-based investment, while other projects, they are loans. Give us the difference between certain projects and whether all of this is happening at once, or what's the timeline of paying back these loans. Take us through that.
Yeah, first of all, I was just going through that report, the World Bank's report, and the figure that they have quoted, about 60 billion. I think that's a little inflated. As we speak, we are running projects in different spheres, and I'll mention about them a little later, but about 34 billion worth of projects are under implementation, out of which 28 are IPP, private sector energy projects. They're all private sector loans, no liability on the government. And as of today, just before the interview, the figure, because I was working on some calculations, the figures are the government liability is less than 6 billion, and that too over a long period of about 20 years. So that is in no way a liability for us. We need to invest in our infrastructure. We need to invest in our energy so that we can remove these bottlenecks towards our economic growth, and we've done that, and we still need to do that. And the next phase, when we're talking about industry coming into Pakistan, Chinese relocation, some of the investment coming from West and rest of the world, I think we need to gear up for having the sort of enabling environment where we can have ease of doing business, requisite infrastructure, energy sources there. So we are moving towards that. And again, moving towards Gwadar, Gwadar, most of the projects are grant. And the good news about Gwadar, and I'll use your platform to state that 2019 is a good year for Gwadar. We have done the groundbreaking of airport. The work is going to start this month, and then the vocational center hospital is going to the groundbreaking is in November. We have finalized the Gwadar city master plan, which will make it on a Shenzhen model, and that would perhaps take it to year 2050.
Mr. Butt, on that point of Gwadar especially, I'd like to ask for your comments on the controversy surrounding that, or what the fears are about the Gwadar port and it being on lease for 40 years.
Yeah, I think this is one of the FAQ, and wherever you go, this is one question, and I'm sure your second question would be about comparing it with Hambantota. But Gwadar is a project that is very dear to Pakistan because because of its proximity to some of the regional connections and energy supply lines, and as they call it in naval terms, the slog. And because of that, it's quite dear to us, and we know that through improvement in the port infrastructure and cities structure, we can really make it as a transshipment hub for the future, and we are really working towards that. The controversy, it's a BOT project, and this BOT project means that they would build certain facilities, from a 3-berth port. It's going to be more over 15-berth port, largest deep sea water port there. The free zone being built just besides the port, and this is going to be one of the biggest free zone in Pakistan, and we're looking for investment. Right. And Gwadar, through CPEC, I'll just take 1 minute of yours, and I just want to highlight what are the biggest achievements through CPEC, and what as a case study could be taken to rest of the forums. One is that some of our less developed areas like in Balochistan and KPK are coming up, and they're connected to major urban centers of Pakistan and then connected to Western China. The other is Thar coal, and we have extracted Thar coal using CPEC projects, and Alhamdulillah today we're talking about the projects in queue, waiting to get in line and get the approvals for coal projects and using Thar coal, and that ensures our energy security while we are working on. Also through CPEC we have, our energy basket has included some renewable energy, and a lot of projects of renewable energy are being included. And besides that, our connectivity, year-long connectivity with Western China is being ensured. So these are the best takeaways from CPEC.
Right. And Mr. Mustafa, Hyder, while we're talking about some of the best takeaways of what has happened so far, let's talk about the future as well. It's no secret that Pakistan is going multi-phase in its history when it comes to the economy. Now, tell us, what are some of the fears that are being highlighted when it comes to CPEC and some of the potential hindrances?
Firstly, I just want to add a few points regarding Gwadar, which Bhatt Saab just made. All the major projects in Gwadar, the international airport, the hospital, the vocational training institute, these are all grants. So these are like synonymous to gifts per se. The 300 megawatt project is also investment, and $250 million has already been invested by the China Overseas Port Holding Company in the free zone. So there's, I don't see any element of borrowing or a loan or debt when it comes to Gwadar, which is the nerve center of the Belt and Road Initiative and CPEC. Moving towards our economic crisis, firstly, I think CPEC, if you contextualize CPEC with our economy, I think CPEC is only a boost to our economy, because the major FDI, if you look at in the past couple of years and even to date, has been from CPEC. And as Bhatt Saab said, all the CPEC projects of energy, which is the lion's share of CPEC projects for the past 5 years in the early harvest projects, are on build, operate and transfer, which is all investment. So when you talk about CPEC, I think it's very important to understand that it's not a monolithic project. CPEC is a host of different projects on different terms and different negotiated final contracts between Chinese companies and the Pakistan government. So when we say CPEC, it's a very loosely used word, but it's a very loaded word. So I think we have to be very careful when we say CPEC has done this, or CPEC has done that, because that's inaccurate in and of itself. CPEC has different projects with different terms. Our economy, I think, is generating, economies move on speculation, on investor confidence, on instinct. And that's what futures work on, that's what stock market works on, is investor confidence, on branding, on how much hope people have, on how people infer the situation, and if they see there will be investments, return on investments in the upcoming years or months or days. That is what economy intrinsically works on. And then, of course, it's the numbers, it's your fiscal expenditures, it's data crunching. So what CPEC has done is it's rebranded Pakistan. And after that, you have seen that Saudi Arabia has come in with a big investment in Gwadar. Before that, I must say, and I must confess, a lot of top Pakistani businessmen did not know much about Gwadar, let alone foreign countries.
And Mr. Hyder, that's a very important point that you're making, that it's attracting foreign investors. And Mr. Andrew, I'd like your take on that as well. When it comes to CPEC and the initiative here, how many countries around in the region are eyeing this project, hoping to have a stake in it? We've seen that previously Iran showed certain interest. Do you see in the near future of there being more partners? Is that a possibility?
Obviously, because according to some estimates, between the year 2015 and 2030, in about 15 years, it's estimated that the CPEC is going to create a lot of jobs. I mean, look beyond the construction, because as I said before, once you install a port, there are all sorts of businesses coming in, including in real estate, hotels, business support services. So there are lots of other business opportunities for other investors, not necessarily big banks or big companies, but even small traders, from around the region. And it's been estimated that during this 15 years period, something like 2.3 million additional jobs will be created in Pakistan, equivalent to something like 2 to 2.5% of the GDP. So I think that this is a great opportunity which attracts other places, including Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong's some small businesses are through our Trade Development Council are looking at some of the opportunities around the region, including CPEC.
Right. And Mr. Andrew, I'd kind of like to end how I began the show, about the World Bank report and how it stated that this project, the BRI in general, has the potential to pull out 32 million people out of poverty. Give us a sense of that, how massive that figure is and how much potential there is in this project.
Yeah, obviously, this kind of sustainable development goals is one of the objectives of China's Belt and Road, because we mentioned a lot of benefits and connectivity, infrastructure, excess capacity, and all that. But one of the most important objectives is really trying to help various recipient countries to attain the sustainable development goals, including jobs for the local people, including livelihood, including capacity building, for example, schools, hospitals, and so on and so forth. So I think that the CPEC is one of the major part of the Belt and Road Initiative. But then, of course, there are challenges. There are perceived deficiencies. As I mentioned before, the question of debt, and I think my colleagues in the panel have addressed that. There's the other aspect which we haven't mentioned, which is the environmental impact. There is a perception that some of these projects impact badly on the environment, even though that there are sort of renewable energy projects, but there are other projects, construction projects, coal, fire, power plant projects, and various other kind of activities which can have an adverse impact on the environment. So I think that addressing all these issues are very important.
Right.
Otherwise, it's going to give China a bad name as well as the Belt and Road.
Right. Mustafa, just last question to you before we wind up the show. How do you think this project is going to move forward in a sustainable manner? Mr. Andrew raised an important point there about the environment, and we know with development there does come implications to the environment. How is this going to move in a sustainable manner?
I think that's a very important question that you ask. And one thing which was a very important theme in the second Belt and Road Forum, which will dictate the progress in all the corridors, including CPEC, was high quality, sustainable, green and clean Belt and Road. And I think that is something that will be implemented in Pakistan as well. And that syncs in very well with the new working group in CPEC, which has been created, called the Socio-Economic Working Group. And that is people-focused projects of clean water, poverty alleviation, youth, capacity building. These are all projects which will be under CPEC, and to make CPEC sustainable, where the projects trickle down to the people, where projects benefit people immediately, not only in the long term, but immediate impact on marginalized sections of society, not only helping them, but making them stand on their own feet and making them independent. And when you talk about climate change and environmental friendly projects, I think it's very important to understand that the coal power projects in CPEC are ultra supercritical technology, which means the carbon footprint of those coal power projects is very negligible. And there's now an increasing focus on renewable energy projects under CPEC.
Right.
And this government has also voiced that interest and demand, which China has reciprocated positively. So I do see a sustainable CPEC in the future, but what we need to do is build the capacity of our Environmental Protection Agency,
right,
which is responsible.
Right. And on that point, thank you so much, Mr. Mustafa Hyder, for joining us and talking to us. Thank you so much, Mr. Hassan Daud for joining us. And thank you, Mr. Andrew Leung, for joining us. Thank you for watching Indus Special. We will see you again tomorrow with more stories. Till then, goodbye and take care.